Welcome to Journey of African Tales. Today, we explore a deeply personal and powerful story about the silent struggles that many new mothers face. This tale speaks to the heart of motherhood, mental health, and the need for support. I don't remember when exactly I stopped recognizing myself. Maybe it was the first night home from the hospital when my baby wouldn't stop crying, and my husband just rolled over in bed, muttering, "Your job, not mine." Or maybe it was when my mother-in-law visited, took one look at my exhausted face, and said, "Women have been doing this for centuries. You'll be fine." I wasn't fine. I was struggling with postpartum depression. Before the baby, things were different. My husband, Emeka, had been my best friend. He would bring me food when I worked late, rub my feet after a long day, and listen, truly listen when I spoke. I remember how we used to laugh together, how he would pull me into his arms and tell me, "No matter what happens, we'll always be a team." But the moment I became a mother, that version of Emeka disappeared. Now when I reached for him in the night, my hands met cold sheets. When I spoke, my words hit a wall. When I cried, no one wiped my tears. I was emotionally isolated. At first, I thought it was just exhaustion. The sleepless nights, the constant crying, the weight of responsibility. I told myself this was just normal for new mothers. But there was something deeper, something heavier, something I couldn't put into words. The days blurred together. I'd wake up, feed my son, change him, rock him to sleep, stare at the wall, repeat. Sometimes I'd hear him crying even when he wasn't. My body ached, not from childbirth, but from something deeper, something that felt like it was eating me alive from the inside. I stopped cooking. The kitchen felt too overwhelming. The thought of chopping vegetables and standing over a stove too much to bear. Dishes piled up, and my mother-in-law would sigh dramatically, shaking her head. Girls of this generation, you can't even keep a home in order. I stopped cleaning. The floor became littered with laundry, baby bottles, and forgotten items I never had the strength to pick up. My husband barely noticed. He would come home, eat, and sleep. I stopped talking. Instead, I started spending long hours in the bathroom. It was the only place I could be alone, the only place where no one was demanding anything from me. I would sit on the cold tiles, knees pulled to my chest, and just cry. Sometimes I would stay in there until my baby's cries forced me to come out. I would pick him up, but there was no connection. Just an empty mechanical motion of feeding and changing him. I hated myself for it. Is this how it is? I wondered. Is this what motherhood is supposed to feel like? Shouldn't I love my baby? Shouldn't I be happy? But I wasn't. At night when my baby cried, I cried too. We sobbed together in the darkness, both of us desperate for something I couldn't even name. And there were times, many times, when all I needed was for my husband to hold me, to wrap his arms around me and tell me I wasn't alone. But he wasn't there. One afternoon, an old friend of my mother-in-law came to visit. She was one of those women who believed in the old ways, visiting new mothers with gifts, checking on them, blessing the baby. She came with a basket of fruit and a small bottle of oil, whispering prayers under her breath as she rubbed it on my son's forehead. Then she turned to me. She took one long look at my face, at my sunken eyes, my trembling hands, and the way I barely reacted to her presence. I was holding my son, but it was like I wasn't there. She frowned. "My dear, are you okay?" I forced a smile. "Yes, Ma, just tired." But she didn't believe me. She turned to my husband. "She doesn't look well. Have you taken her to see a doctor?" My husband chuckled. "She's just stressed. It happens to all new mothers." She looked at my mother-in-law. "Mama, have you noticed her? She's not herself." My mother-in-law waved her off. "It's nothing. She just needs to snap out of it." But the woman wasn't convinced. That evening, she called my mother. I didn't know about the call at first. I was too deep in my fog, barely registering anything around me. But my mother did. She arrived the next morning, unannounced. My mother-in-law's eyes widened in surprise, but my mother didn't waste time on pleasantries. She walked straight to me, took one look at my face, and knew. "Pack a bag. You're coming home." My husband scoffed. "She doesn't need to go anywhere. She's fine." My mother's voice was sharp. "You think this is fine?" She turned to my mother-in-law. "You, a woman, think this is fine?" My mother-in-law stammered. "It's just, she's a mother now. She has responsibilities. And she won't be a mother if she doesn't get help. You're overreacting, my mother-in-law said, folding her arms. My mother took a step closer. Her voice dropped, her words slow and deliberate. You raised a son who thinks his wife's suffering is nothing more than stress. You sit in this house and watch her fade, and instead of helping, you criticize her. You call yourself a mother, but would you want your daughter to live like this? Silence. I didn't argue. I didn't resist. I just stood up, walked into the bedroom, and threw a few clothes into a bag. My husband didn't stop me. He barely looked up. A week later, he came. I was in my childhood room, sitting on the floor, not when I heard his voice outside. My mother let him in, but she made it clear. If you came to convince her to return, leave now. But Emeka wasn't the same. His eyes were red, his face sunken with guilt. I didn't know, he said. No one told me postpartum depression was real. No one talks about it. I thought you would just adjust like every other woman. I stared at him, silent. I'm sorry. His voice cracked. I should have been there. I should have seen you. Please, let me try again. Healing didn't happen overnight, but it began. Slowly, I started bonding with my child, holding him not out of duty, but love. The weight on my chest lightened, piece by piece. I started therapy. My therapist said it wasn't just depression. It was the weight of a patriarchal society that taught me my pain didn't matter, that my suffering was expected, that women should endure in silence. But I refuse. I'm speaking now because I wish someone had spoken for me. If you're watching this and you feel like you're drowning, you are not alone. You deserve help. You deserve support. And most importantly, you deserve to be heard.